Hey guys, welcome to the 71st programming tutorial, and in this tutorial we're going to continue looking at writing to files. And in this tutorial we're going to be generating a file that holds information about students. It's going to hold their last name and then their GPA. So the file is going to look exactly like this. At the top of the file we're just going to have the student count, so the amount of student entries in the file. And then at the beginning of each entry we're just going to have the length of the student's name, which is going to be an integer. And then we're just going to have the student's last name itself, which is obviously going to be a string. And then following the student's name, we're just going to have their GPA, which is going to be a float. Alright, so in our program here, the first thing that we need to do is ask the user for the amount of students that they're going to be entering information about. So we're just going to go ahead and ask the user for that number. So, how many students are there? And then end the line. Alright, and then the next thing that we need to do is just obviously read the number that they enter. And we're going to be reading the number that they enter into an integer variable called student count. And then to actually read that information off the console, we're obviously just going to be using the function scanf. So scanf is going to be an integer obviously, so modulus I. And then we're going to be reading this number into this student count variable up here. So we're going to pass through the address of it. Okay, so after we read in the amount of students, we just need to output that number to the file. So in order to write an integer to the file, we're going to be using a function called fprintf, which stands for file printf, or file print format. So we're going to say fprintf, and then the fprintf function is the exact same thing as the printf function, except it outputs the information to the file instead of to the console. Alright, so the first parameter of the fprintf function is just going to be the file that we're going to be writing to. So we're just going to pass through file. And then the second parameter is just the format of the information that we're going to be outputting. And we're just going to be outputting the student count, which is an integer, and then just a new line. And then we're just going to be outputting the student count variable. Alright, so now that we've written the student count information at the top of the file right here, we then need to be writing information about each student. We're going to be getting all the student information from the user, so we're just going to go ahead and loop through here for the amount of students that they said they were going to be entering information about. So for int I equals 0, while I is less than student count, and then we'll just increment I. Alright, so inside this for loop right here is where we're going to be asking the user for information about the student. So the first thing that we need to do is just ask the user for the student's last name. So we're going to say printf, what is the student's last name? And the next thing that we need to do is allocate enough memory to store the student's last name. And we're just going to go ahead up here and create a character array to store the student's last name. So we're going to say character array student name. And then we'll just allocate 30 characters of memory, and we'll initialize all those characters to 0. Alright, and now we're just going to go ahead and read the student's last name into this memory right here. So in order to read that, we're just going to go ahead and be using the scanf function, so scanf, and then we're just going to be reading a string in, so modulus s, and we're going to be reading the student's name into this memory right here, so just type in student name. So now that we have a student name, we only need one more piece of information about the student, and that's just going to be their GPA. So we're going to go up here and just create a float to hold information about the student's GPA, so we're just going to call it GPA. And then down here we're going to go ahead and ask the user for the student's GPA, so printf, what is the student's GPA? And the line, and then we'll just go ahead and read the GPA in using scanf. So scanf, we're reading in a float, so modulus f, and we're going to be reading it into the GPA variable, so the address of GPA. Alright, so now that we have all the information we need, we can begin writing the entry to the file. So in order to write this, this entry to the file right here, we're going to be using the fprintf function just like we did up here. So we're going to say fprintf, and then obviously the first parameter is the file that we're writing to, so file, and then the second parameter is the format of the information that we're going to be writing. So the first thing that we need to do at the beginning of each entry is just write the length of the student's name, So that's obviously going to be an integer, so we just need to say modulus I. And then after that, we're just going to put a space, and then we need to write the student's name. So that'll be a string, modulus S. And then we just need to write the student's GPA, which is going to be a float, so modulus F. And we're actually going to be formatting it so that there will only be 2 decimal places, so we're just going to put 0.2F, so that after the decimal point in the GPA, there will only be 2 digits. So the first thing that we need to do right here is just supply the length of the student's name. And to get the length of the student's name, we're going to be using a function in the string header file called strlen, which we went over in a previous tutorial, but basically all that it does is just gets the length of a string. And we're just going to pass through student name since we want to get the length of that string. Okay, and then the next thing that we need to do is just output the student's last name, so student name. And then lastly, we just need to output their GPA, which is just in the variable GPA. Okay, so this right here will just write all the student entries for us. So the last thing that we're going to do right here is just output on the screen, letting the user know that the file was generated successfully. So we're going to say file generated successfully. So now let's go ahead and run this and give it a test. Okay, so the first thing that we're asked is how many students there are. We'll just go ahead and say 2 since I don't feel like entering in a bunch of information. And then we're just going to enter in the student's last name. We'll say Jones. And what is the student's GPA? We'll say Jones is an idiot and has a 30.5. And then the next person, we'll say his last name is Smith, and we'll say that Smith is smart and has a 99.6 GPA. And then we just get out down here, files generated successfully. So let's go on my desktop and open this file, students.txt. And we see in the file that Jones and Smith are on the same line, and that's just because I'm dumb. And we need to go back in code blocks right here and put a new line after this right here. Alright, so let's just go ahead and run this again. Sorry about that, but it should work this time. Okay, so 2, student's last name, Jones will say 30, or we'll fit 50, whatever, doesn't really matter. Smith, and then 79, doesn't really matter. Okay, so file was generated successfully. Go back on my desktop, make sure that it worked this time, and yeah, it did. Alright, so that's it for this tutorial, so see you guys.